Hello, guten Tag. Welcome to the B3 Biennale of the Moving Image 2021. My name is Sten Salover, and in the next hour, we will talk with two very exciting artists around a very critical topic, new formats, new stories. How will the process of creativity change in the future? We'll be exploring topics such as the convergence on formats and what that implies for artists in terms of opportunities, storytelling and expression. But we'll be also looking at the issues of democratization of technology and to which this has been reflected in artistic practices and opportunities, but yet also things around platform, censorship, and so forth. We'll also be looking at how existing curation, exhibition, and funding structures encourage and discourage artists, and then how our existing formats, especially on the audience side, such as film festivals or art festivals or convergence festivals as the B3 Biennale, how they interact with those complex politics of access, financing, and audiences. With great pleasure, I would love to introduce our two conversationists today, Max Colson, who is an animator from UK, and Igor Simić, I guess, who's an artist from Serbia. Max is born and based in London and works predominantly with digital media and film, and his work explores the intersection between architectural landscape and considers the relationships to themes of class, national identity, technological disruption, and urban change. His recent screenings of work include the Sheffield Docs, which is a fantastic documentary and film festival between London, Verkleid's Centre of Media Art, the Royal Academy, the Royal Institute of British Architects, Film London, and others. And on top of his artistic work, he also teaches the Masters of Graphic Communication Design at the Central St. Martin's and is a graduate of London College of Communications in photojournalism and documentary. Igor was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. He graduated from film studies and philosophy and has exhibited extensively in solo and group exhibitions in film festivals in Serbia, Germany, Italy, Hong Kong, Greece, and Spain. If I'm correct, he's also been a Berlinale talent. And he has also worked in short film installation and most recently also in game formats. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Gentlemen, I guess our only limitation here is time, so I guess we should get going. It's a very broad topic, but I'd really like to get going, starting discussing the intersection of moving image as quite a convergent format, right? You both are multidisciplinary, as you worked in film, in animation, in 3D, and so forth, and exploring quite complex subjects such as man's relationship to power, capital technology, politics of history and technology, and space, and so forth. Max, I would love to start from you. I'd really like to, because you're working in an intersection of architecture and film and architectural tools and architectural visualization and short films, which is quite a unique format. So what topics inspire you and why you specifically picked this particular medium?
Okay, well, I've got some slides prepared. I'm going to jump through them a little bit, but I think this will kind of set up a bit about the context of my practice and why I choose the particular mediums that I do. So I'm going to share my entire screen now, and hopefully you can see. Can you see this slide?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So I'm just going to full screen it. So one of the things that I guess influences the mediums that I choose is that I do everything myself. I'm a director, animator, producer, writer, editor, and that means that that my kind of, you know, I guess my position in the kind of film production process, I kind of have to be a jack of all trades, and so that really affects the kinds of software that I use, and I'll kind of explain a bit about why I use particular kinds of software. But I kind of come from a documentary background, and that really influences the topics that I choose. I often start off with developing work from a kind of real world scenario, and I'm really interested in documenting and archiving knowledge related to architecture, landscape, and British national identity. I guess I'm not going to talk about that, but yeah. So I make films through a kind of, I guess, like, I kind of start off with like a very rough idea, and then I go through quite a convoluted kind of research process, where I'm kind of doing research, I'm writing scripts, and I'm editing, and I'm also producing animation or a kind of a virtual world scenario, as I've kind of recently been doing. And then that ends up with a kind of final film moving image project. So the production itself is research, and that's very important to developing the work that I do. And I'll talk through some of the projects I've made using this process. But basically, I always start off with a rough idea, which changes radically through the production process. And this is something that is really intrinsic to my own practice and helps produce, I think, quite distinctive new moving image work. But it's also quite difficult to fund, because all of the funders want a kind of a fully formed script or idea at the beginning, and I never had that. I need to go through the production process to get the script. I'm gonna kind of talk through a few moving image projects. So one part of my work is really focused on I guess, like, kind of how the built environment in the UK changes, and particularly London, how that changes because of capital investment. And so, some of my work has dealt with the influence of capital and, in public and in the production of new public space, and kind of in the production of public spaces which are segregated and actually not that public. So in 2015, this led to my first film, which was a kind of a fictional architectural fly-through of a new bus service for London, which has been taken over by Chinese investors. And they financed a new segregated London bus service. And on this bus, there was a segregated, there's a kind of higher echelon premium top deck, and below the, with various kind of perks. And then in the bottom, it's more of like an EasyJet, very like rough and ready kind of area where, you know, people are like stacked quite high and there's not very much space, and it doesn't look particularly nice either. And this was kind of my first kind of animation. I was using SketchUp software to do this, as it was quite a kind of basic, easy tool for me to use as someone who'd never used animation before. I was kind of overlaying graphics with After Effects, but you can see the kind of the style is quite rudimentary, and actually that's something that's quite intrinsic to the kind of work I make. So this is this film about the segregated bus service, and then I then began in 2017. I got really interested in the development of was a kind of particular type of development that was happening in London in the early 2010s, where incredibly rich people, because they couldn't build upwards and they couldn't add value to their home by adding new floors to the top of their house, they were starting to dig underneath their homes and excavate 5 stories below the ground. And they were developing a form of housing called an iceberg home, which is so termed because the iceberg home is actually larger underneath the ground than it is above ground. And this is a particular proposal by a very rich estate agent founder for his car museum, 4-story car museum underneath the earth. And this is real. This is not James Bond. And so this led to a new film, which was called Construction Lines, which is again produced in SketchUp. In the course of this film, an animator uses architectural plans of a real proposal for an iceberg home, where a Canadian billionaire proposed to dig 3 floors underneath his mansion to build a garage, a sauna, a ballroom, servants' quarters. The film it's a short film. It's 7 minutes. You can see it. It will be exhibited in B3. But the kind of as I kind of began to do research for this film, I uncovered a lot of complaints that the neighbours to this property made about this planning application. They were very angry about it. And they started to speculate about the kinds of activity that would go on underneath the ground. And some of those complaints were reasonable, but some of them were actually quite obnoxious and judgmental. But these speculative complaints became the material for what I would animate within this home. And so during the course of the film itself, you see the animator or me kind of constructing this home, but the script, which is voiced by different voiceover artists, is voicing the speculative complaints of the neighbors. So it's a documentary work, but it's also fictional, and it's enacting the fictions of these real neighbors as they complain about the home. And over the course of the film, these complaints end up being layered over each other in the actual architecture of the home. And so I didn't really know where this film was going to go at the beginning of this project, and that's how the research production process developed. And this is exhibited it's been exhibited in various places, gone to quite a few film festivals, and it's won a couple of awards. And it led to the second. How much time do I have left?
Go ahead.
So it led to the production process for Construction Lines led to the second thematic strand of my work, which is making animations or virtual environments that deal with British national identity and the constructed nature of British national identity. In 2017, I also made this film, The Green and Pleasant Land, which is a kind of like similarly to Construction Lines, is a film that follows a construction process in 14 minutes, where an animator is doing research about, or they're trying to kind of collect together images and ideas and notions of British identity in history, and they collect them together on this 3D model. So you see this kind of internet research happening, and they're constructing these quite romantic images of Britain, and it's not very accurate. So that was exhibited and it's also kind of been shown at lots of different film festivals. It was great to have the premiere at Sheffield Doc Fest, for example. And this has then led to my most recent project, which is a virtual world and is also dealing with British national identity. And this is dealing more with how memories of the Second World War and Britain's kind of resilience during the Second World War are being kind of reused and recirculated during times of national crisis. So there's this notion of Blitz spirits in the UK, which is when the Nazis were bombing Britain, the government created this idea of Blitz spirit, which is the idea of British people having this like intrinsic characteristic of being able to keep calm and carry on no matter what adversity is thrown at them. And obviously this is not really correct, and there were lots of different things that happened during the Blitz, such as, you know, there were lots of people who weren't keeping calm and carrying on. There were lots of people who were looting each other during the bombing, so this. But I've been interested in this kind of recirculation of this kind of Second World War mythology during the coronavirus crisis, and also during Brexit, the UK's departure from the European Union. So this is a kind of government propaganda poster of, you know, kind of reminding people to, or making people feel as if being at home and shutting themselves away from the coronavirus is like being part of the home front, which was a kind of national defense force that existed during the Blitz. So the home front, where, you know, kind of dealing with the aftermath of bombing. And I've created this virtual world called The Islands, which kind of, I guess, it presents, or kind of the contradictions in the, you know, the recirculation of this Second World War mythology with what Britain is really today. You know, we were kind of all sitting at home getting Amazon deliveries rather than being on the home fronts and doing our kind of, I don't know, like, I was kind of interested in this idea of national duty and whether receiving Amazon deliveries through the post was really part of kind of national duty. And so this island kind of, it presents media from the Second World War, but kind of juxtaposes it with content from present day UK, and you can walk through this island as a single player. But it's a kind of new medium that I'm really interested in exploring as a kind of documentary tool. And then I don't know, maybe I should leave it there. But
yes. I have a lot of other questions on why and how you've specifically picked these mediums, but I think the cue into game engines and utilizing game engines to build those artistic experiences is a good way to discuss, Igor, your work. You have been a filmmaker, but you're also a philosopher, and you're exploring, I think, quite existentialist questions between, I would say, man's capabilities, as you did in Spine. You're looking at the capitalist systems in your most recent film, which is very enjoyable. I highly recommend to see it at the B3 as well. What inspires you to create work, and how is your working process within those formats?
I mean, the short answer is I think about everything in terms of almost a joke. So I try to figure out a premise, a one-liner that is kind of funny, and that becomes the gist of a new project. So in the case of Spine 2.0, I was thinking about a kind of crisis of leadership. So how do we fix that? How do we have moral, impeccable leaders who make great decisions, etc.? And at the time, I learned about Thomas Sankara, who founded Burkina Faso. So the colony of Upper Volta, when he had his coup, he changed the name to Burkina Faso, which literally means land of upright people. So I liked the idea, the branding of land of upright people. And he was a kind of famous, charismatic leader, notoriously stingy with his own money and the way he lived, etc. And he was killed by his colleague and best friend, etc. So I was thinking, okay, how would you promote this Ankara into something, or his ideas into something cool, where maybe if you can download it on your iPhone. So I was thinking maybe this great leadership has to be like ad for a new MacBook. And that's how I came up with Spine 2.0, an implant for spineless people like CEOs or politicians. They just put it in and they have a backbone. So it's an elaborate joke, basically. And what we do is, I don't really use the computer. So all of the people who work with me, we then do 3D modeling, we go on set, we shoot, etc. So I basically treat everything as a film director. And the most recent example is Golf Club Wasteland, and that was a real
which is a gamified experience.
Yeah, it's a full-on game. So the thing is, I never really played games, and all of my friends are developers and engineers, and they have decent paying jobs doing that, but it's excruciatingly boring. So they suggested, let's come up, you're the idea guy, come up with some ideas and let's see if we can start a company. So the challenge was that at the time they had day jobs. So I had to figure out how to have something that is not too complicated to make in their evening hours after work, yet effective. So the idea was there was a great ecological catastrophe. The 0.1% of the ultra rich evacuated. They just left Earth and went to Mars, to Tesla City. The rest of us, and I assume you, Stan, and Max are not trillionaires, the rest of us are dead. And now, years later, in their spare time, these people from Mars occasionally revisit Earth to play golf in the ruins. And that was it. It was simple because it's a golf mechanic in terms of gameplay. And a friend of mine, an architect who has more of Max's approach, he built the environments, and it's very minimalistic. Games like Kentucky Route Zero or Monument Valley were reference points. And the main character of the game was the pilot to the Mars mission. So he is a kind of misfit. And the selling point, because when I met with the people from Apple, from the App Store, they featured the game, but the highlight was the soundtrack. So I basically, again, I don't know anything about music, but I used the project as a way to abuse or whatever my complex is that I have no musical talent. So what I do is I write lyrics, and then with Shane, who is our in-house composer, audio director, we work on a melody, and then we call up musicians and we make a song together. And that's how we created Radio Nostalgia from Mars, which is the radio program in the game. It's like a GTA radio, but it's all original. And people who now live on Mars, they call our radio program to share memories of their past life on Earth that they destroyed, because they miss it now. So, and it's retro music from the 2040s. And that's basically the concept. And after that, I mean, it was August 3rd, it was released on Sony, PlayStation, on Xbox, on Nintendo Switch, and on Steam, and I believe on Epic Store. So around it, we've done 3 animated music videos, and the album will be available. So it's a kind of, they call it transmedia. We, in our company, call it Constellation Storytelling. And that's roughly what we do. We signed a new deal for a second game within the same world, and touch wood, we'll sign a third deal next week for a third game in the same world. And they're getting more complex as we go along. And we're now able to hire people who actually know something about games, so they help me out with level design and gameplay and so forth.
Interesting. From architect, your both direction are moving towards games and interactive worlds, and I want to touch this question a little bit later. Technology is really important part of for both of you, the work what you do, and I want to touch on this this big discussion. If you look back on in the 90s, with the advent of internet and more faster processing power and so forth, there was this big dream of democratization of technology, where look at Manuel Castells, look at perhaps Lev Manovich, his work and so forth. And the idea there was that, you know, the technology, especially the internet, would bring on the convergence of formats which would enable anything and everything, and both artistic freedom, distribution and so forth. To which degree you see the state of the art of the relationship of artist and technology, and I would say the freedom of expression and the democracy, both in terms of the artist, the work itself, as well as, let's say, more of the capitalist structures around that. Max?
So I guess like the relationship between the artist and like technology, for me, it's really interesting hearing Igor's kind of talk about his production process, and so for me, in the UK, the funding environment is really difficult for like kind of artistic production, and so it's I find it extremely difficult to come by money for projects. I mean, if I do come by money, but it's small. Is, you know.
So here's a question, and I will ask this for Igor later. So how do you actually pitch Flame? I think is one of a unique program with Film London, right? That specifically enables artists to work. But I really wonder, how would you go into a narratively structured pitching competition and saying, "Hey, this is my work. Please finance it." What is it?
Well, I mean, like, to be honest, I haven't done like a kind of a narrative structured pitching competition before. I would pitch like a general idea, like a synopsis, and then hopefully get some funding for that. But in, you know, just from like the main funding bodies, it's very difficult to like for artist funding, like the amounts are very small. So Mike, going back to your original question about the relationship between the artist and technology, because the funding budgets that I am able to access are very small, I have to use, or like, you know, that it kind of dictates the platforms that I'm able to access. And you know, the software that I'm able to access is the stuff that I'm able to get for free, the stuff I'm able to crack. Sorry, I'm not saying like which ones, but and it's also the kind of, you know, it's the 3D asset stores that are publicly available. Yes. And also it's kind of determined the nature of my practice, which is very much about appropriating content and recontextualizing it. So reappropriating like kind of 3D assets, kind of archival material, kind of social media posts, and so for me, you know, if a platform is really easy to understand and learn, I found Unity extremely easy. SketchUp is obviously extremely straightforward, and so it's the kind of economic environment that in Britain, in the UK, they're like the very I guess the very like, yeah, just the lack of like kind of cultural funding that influences the kinds of technologies that I use, and also the kinds of work that I make, because of the small production budgets. I'm also, you know, I fund my practice through teaching and through freelance photography. So I'm looking for platforms that in the spare amounts of time that I have, that are like really efficient and quick to use. So that also influences the kind of platforms that I use. And yes, so that's what I'd say to that. That's the context.
Igor, you have taken I would say, a rather contradictory approach in a way of working with groups of people, with DOPs, colorists, performers, game designers, and so forth. How are you managing this in this rather complex structure?
Well, for all of my video work, I basically paid everything out of pocket. And then when we worked on the game, it was a kind of joint venture where I financed part of it by art sales. So I realized with video that I was very surprised that I entered the contemporary art world. It happened. It was hapstance. The premiere was at Edinburgh Film Festival of this short film that was kind of my breakout thing, The Thinker in the Supermarket. Thanks. But this was like in 2013, and I just happened. I used WeTransfer, and there was an open call for some art thing, and I sent it over. And the video ended up winning the first prize at what is now Art Fair in Düsseldorf. So I realized, wait, so if I do short films and I send them to film festivals, unless I win all of the prizes, there's no money to be made there. Or I do a short film as basically a trailer for what I want to do in a feature-length film. That's the model, right? So what I've done is I saw, well, these art people, they're crazy enough to maybe even buy these videos. And I find it rather stupid that you buy USB sticks, but in these limited editions, and the whole business model is, I think, suspect. But and a curator at the Pompidou agrees with me, and he's in the film department. But the thing is, then I realized that the sales of videos are also minuscule within the art world. So I looked at video artists that were making money, and I looked at Matthew Barney. And Matthew Barney, yes, as someone who studies film, I didn't think too highly of his Cremeister cycle, aside from some production design and the just general craziness. But I realized that he uses the objects from the production as art pieces. And I've seen the latest exhibition at the Yale Gallery, and he literally worked the art pieces into the production, and they're very beautiful and highly produced, etc. There's obviously a fetish of an object there, but the film is the main art piece still. So I said, let me try that. So with the spine, there was a 2-minute ad for the spine, but then there's a 3D kind of sculpture that is reminiscent either of Brancusi's bird or of Hoover vacuum cleaners of Jeff Koons. So there I made a combo, and it was easier to sell that way because people want an object. So I basically put that money into the startup. And what happened with the startup, once the game was out and etc., now the other direction was interesting. Because when I met with, for example, at GDC, when I met the people from Apple, when they hear, oh, you're an artist and you finance your startup with your art, blah, blah, that's a great story, But then vice versa was interesting. So curators, when they hear, once I met Hans-Ulrich Hobrist, and he was like, serbische Künstler. And I'm always like, who gives a F whether you're, nationality, blah, blah, blah. I'm just an artist. And immediately within continental Europe, you have to be put in a box of which country, etc. And it's natural. I don't mind it. But once I mentioned gaming, he lit up. And obviously at the Serpentine Gallery, he invited Ian Chang, who uses gaming environments, engines, AI, etc. But I found that fascinating. So what happened in Palazzo Strozzi in Florence, they've shown the game, the videos, and then we made the neons that are featured in
Yes.
the game, like Blade Runner neons, into physical objects and kind of transformed the space into something more immersive. Because for me, among contemporary art, Pierre Huyghe is a big reference. He had that big installation at Documenta where you basically enter something like, I don't know, a Fallout landscape. That's the art piece, and the performer is a dog that walks around, etc. So in this case, we created that in an art space. So it worked the other way, and then I sell the neons. And I joke with the collectors. I would text them if the game, for example, we had, and that was funny because we had a review, a very positive review in the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, yet the game is a satire of Bezos. And I would text the collector with the link of the press clipping saying the value of your art piece of the neon just went up. So it's I see all of that. I don't take it seriously. It's all just a joke.
It's very, very interesting. And the question what I wanted to ask, especially on the notion of Max's comment on the kind of financing structures and so forth, and Igor, your rather humorous yet quite apparent reality around this. We see in many ways, we see that the tools of expression and distribution are very much converging. We see the movement from moving image into interactive game worlds, and there is a sorts of an availability and democratization, of course, around pricing and so forth is another type of a question. But we see that opportunities in terms of realize the artistic vision are there, yet at the same time, we are in the still very much grounded both in terms of the appreciation structure. But Igor, you mentioned that there needs to be, let's say, a physical, or you said an object fetishization complex, and at the same time also narrative structures, right? Whereas our financing schemes are very much defined around the idea of short films, where they are appropriately shown. That short films belong to a film festival and they would need to emerge from filmmakers. And art pieces are video art, and they come from video artists and not necessarily film directors. And we could make several of those examples. Why do you think those structures are so persistent? We understand that, especially with the rise of more immersive formats and also the change in the audiences, it's breaking down from that point, but still those core structures still remain there. What are your thoughts on this? Max, Igor.
No, I mean, I the only thing I can say is there's a magazine from Berlin, and I'm not sure how you pronounce the title because it's one of those hipster magazines, 032C, and it's kind of very popular, and they have collaborations both with artists and fashion designers. And they had one title that was kind of famous called The Big Flat Now. So the thesis of the title is everything is big today. So the three of us are talking now. This video will have somewhere between 5 and 55 views. And simultaneously,
a bit more, I can tell from last year's experience.
And it's no, I'm just being self-deprecating here. So we are doing this. And simultaneously, while we are conversing, there's hundreds of others just like this happening and being uploaded. So everything is big. It's humongous. And I'm just talking about YouTube and about conference videos. God knows, like Emma Chamberlain has more views with one video of her waking up in the morning than Maurizio Cattelan has visitors at all of his exhibitions ever. So that's fascinating. And so it's big, it's flat. So Emma Chamberlain, Kim Kardashian, Leonardo da Vinci, Stephen Hawking, it's all the same now. On the screen, it's the same. So when you scroll, they're on the same screen and have the same square. There's no better square for people who are smarter or more beautiful or more ethical or anything like that. and it's now, so it's happening simultaneously. And so what I find fascinating there is that everything in theory is in place for these structures that you talk about to fall apart or to be challenged in theory. Yet, like at any point in history, you have something very old simultaneously existing with something very new. So the gatekeepers are there. And if you want to be, for example, a filmmaker, one of the reasons I pivoted, as they would say in startup lingo, from doing short films into contemporary art, into gaming, and now I'm preparing my first feature-length film, is that the process of financing film is excruciating, it's boring, it's time-consuming, and you die with 3 films behind you at the end if you're a feature-length filmmaker. Yes. And I'm very conflicted on all of these models. So my solution is basically eclecticism, a salad of all of these things. Because initially, when I started out, I thought, okay, I'll do this film, it will be recognized, and I'll easily get funding for my first feature. That will be a work of genius, and then the second feature, and it goes all from that. But what you realize is, and maybe this is ties to the general topic that we're discussing here, in a way, film is passé. So what happens is, I was very surprised. You mentioned that I was at Berlinale Talents. I was very surprised when I saw all of these filmmakers. None of them looked like Fellini. I just saw people with tote bags running around and pulling people's sleeves. And it didn't seem like the great film directors, I didn't see Jane Campion, a flamboyant kind of person, but I saw people who look like salesmen or saleswomen. So one of the reasons for this is because it's relegated to the level of ballet cinema in a way. So you have to ask for the state or a Ministry of Culture or some fund for money. Or if you're doing video art, you need to ask a collector for money. And so that's why we experimented with gaming, because you go into the market and you enter the dog-eat-dog fight of competition. And I think for within the micro spaces of a given field, the gatekeepers are still there, and it will stay that way. And it's, for example, a challenge for me for a lot of these contexts to explain, wait, but why does the quote unquote commercial success of the game lessen the artistic value of the whole project? It doesn't, in my estimation. So I'm doing also a kind of uphill battle in the sense of wanting to hone in all the way that these barriers, in my practice, that these barriers are non-existent. And I would, of course, tongue-in-cheek, always mention Kanye, because I would say, wait, you do all of that rap music. For all of the covers, you hire contemporary artists, like Kondo, like Miyazaki. You do all of these elaborate music videos. You do clothing. You do farming, architecture with Turrell, who is now, I was just at Art Basel, like his installation is there. It's as mainstream as you can get in terms of the art world. You fake run for president. So that's a performance piece. You do listening party. You change your name. You do a listening party. So if you take a look at the last listening party, it's a recreation of Joseph Beuys' performance. The only difference is that Joseph Beuys was in a cage with a coyote and a coat, and Kanye had the Balenciaga coat that was later for sale. But it's a fascinating topic where you have within that one character, he's a character, you have this Gesamtkunstwerk that doesn't care about any context. And then people that he promoted, like Virgil Abloh, I don't think that's great in terms of that particular work. But within your question, it's fascinating. Had an exhibition at, I think, the Chicago Institute of the Arts with his fashion. And remember, Walter Benjamin, way back when, wrote that in the era of mechanical reproduction, everything becomes so expendable that all art becomes like fashion. It will just be thrown away each season. So, you know, it's challenging, it's shit in a way, but it's also a fascinating thing. It's exciting because there's, I believe there's a leveling not only of media in these contexts, but also of values. And that's dangerous, but it's a possibility for something new.
Max, I think you are coming from a very, I would say, politically turbulent environment. I mean, both in terms of the British identity and the class politics, and also the recent history as well. And in many ways, Britain is the flagship of narrative structures in moving image. We can't get around Bond premiering last week, which is, I guess, in many ways a pinnacle of a narrative structure, but it's also a pinnacle of the narrative capitalist structure in many ways, of product placement, of fetishization, of somehow mirroring and giving back to the trends in the society, and so forth. So where do you see those structures emerging, and why they are so persistent at the time where we do think of new spaces emerging?
So the question is about, why are there certain narrative structures that persist, or why is there a particular kind of narrative that film funders are looking for?
I think they're both this different sides of the same coins. That why, because film funds in many ways reflect some types of aspiration around a certain type of a cultural discipline or practice, and then as we see that more and more, those types of new exciting narratives which also talk to people, well, either in consumption or participation and so forth, that's another type of a question. That why we have still this desire to preserve what it is, whereas the technological world and the expression world has moved so far ahead.
Yeah. So just from my own experience, in Britain, like the main film funder, like for is the British Film Institute, and they have a short film funding pot which is for innovative and risky filmmaking. And
I always wonder what that innovative means, but I've never figured out what exactly that stands for.
And their criteria for this is that in order to get this funding, you cannot be a writer-director. You have to have a separate producer who has their own limited company who submits the application. The writer is separate, the director is separate, and there's got to be a team of at least 2 people, maybe 3. There's also got to be in submission with this this pot, and it's not a huge amount of money, you know, for this funding. You've also got to submit a kind of a very clear script in standard industry formatting, and I totally get the context for why there's this kind of there's this structure in place. It's all about like kind of making sure that, you know, the people, you know, that there's well, it's about risk aversion, you know, like there's a producer who has a credible company who can like rubber seal, you know, like rubber stamp the idea, and I think, you know, like there's you know, but this is a kind of production model which is I think for like much larger pots, you know, it's about like the kind of production of projects which have teams of people and shoot dates for 3 weeks where there are masses of people who are in one day at one time, and there's like there's all of the expenses, food production,
and very much
catering,
about
etc.
physicality also, and
Yeah, like
location.
all of the logistics, and of course, like the money has to be well and carefully spent. But these kind of funding structures like completely dismiss that films can come from like really small production teams, and they can kind of work with very small amounts of money to do like kind of experimental moving image research where there is an idea at the beginning, but through the production of it, and through the kind of engaging with a new software environment in relation to an idea, a new way of doing narrative, or a new way of kind of making film or moving image or virtual environments can be created. So I think I'm not arguing against there being a kind of like a kind of a funding structure that is kind of quite old school in what I was just talking about, but I'm making an argument for there being like you can actually commit much smaller amounts of money to smaller, more nimble teams of people, and or even like individuals, and they can also produce work that like finds audiences around the world, and goes to lots of film festivals and wins awards for innovation, and so I kind of I think a lot of or like people want easy now, or like these funding structures exist because of a history of film production, but actually because of convergence, because someone like me can animate, can kind of script write, can direct, can film edit. I can do everything. I literally can do everything myself, and like I actually need much less money to make something that has potentially, or I feel would have a bigger impact than the work that's produced through these old school methods.
So this is a very interesting thought. I think that whilst we see the formats evolving and they become more interdisciplinary, and I think in many ways they become less physical or placeless, in a kind of a sense that they are not grounded in some type of a particular physical reality or jurisdiction or even an identity, especially if you look at virtual production, and they're also consumed in a totally different type of a way. Then I think it's quite interesting to see. Whereas if I would kind of throw this back, that if the production and financing structure has been pretty much focused on identity, nationality, locality, but also actually on the economics of the production, because the idea is to not only finance ideas and creation, but it's also to finance industries. And whilst those industries are becoming digital and personalized, whether on a studio level or on an individual level, then that type of reflection hasn't really turned back into the way how the mechanics of financing are happening. If I interpret you both well, what excites you? We talked about the way of things going into more game engines, and it seems that games are becoming the new, I don't know, not the cinema, but the new mass medium. De facto, they are already surpassing, but creatively, I think we are on the horizon of something exciting. Last year has been tremendous in terms of like both narrative and experimental games. If you look at the kind of the future formats and the way your work is evolving, what are the kind of 3 exciting things that are keeping you up at night?
You mean generally in media? What's
your work and generally?
So for me, gaming is almost a discovery because I didn't play games growing up. So I found out about a game called Nier Automata, and my mind was blown. Or, for example, I am now acquainted with Kojima and what he is doing.
Death Stranding, yes.
Yes. And that conversion of him hiring people like Lea Seydoux and the Walking Dead guy. That's a kind of blurring of cinema and gaming is interesting. So that's a big thing. I think television is fascinating. It's very weird what's happening with streaming in a very short time, like literally a blink of an eye in terms of history of art. It shifted from the cinema to streaming. And if you look at, for example, UK talent like Phoebe Waller-Bridge with Fleabag, or Michaela Cohen with I Might Destroy You. She just won an Emmy. I have a kind of crush on her. That, like, it's fascinating. Come on, they're acting. So remember the early days of cinema, Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton. They're kind of doing that. Acting, directing, writing their own material. I mean, and people like it. So it's not, a niche. It's for the masses. Now, that's also an interesting thing, that the idea of the masses has changed for something you mentioned, Stan, where it's personalized. So when Friends were airing, or Seinfeld, and Seinfeld took a long time to pick up in season 3, if they had the numbers that TV series have today on streaming platforms, they would be canceled, because you had 5 or 10 TV channels, and you had to have a large swath of people, Middle America, the coasts, etc., international syndication. But now you can target with something like Euphoria a certain bracket, a certain audience of teenagers, young adults, etc. So it's also becoming flat and very fragmented. So I'm eager to see what happens with TV series primarily. And this is another example of this multidisciplinary approach with Donald Glover's Atlanta, the new season of that. So he is interesting. I almost did something with Unity, because I got a call from them. I'm not sure, is there an NDA for this? It's fine. So there's for something to do something like a virtual concert or something, and he was involved in a part of that. So he is experimenting with that. He's a musician, and there's a writer, actor, writer, actor in Atlanta. So that's also something fascinating. And the series, I love Atlanta as a series. So that's another thing. And in my own stuff, we're working on 2 games at the moment as Demagogue Studio, and I'm pushing hard for my first feature-length film. And that's also, it's almost happening unconsciously. The gaming is in a way referring to real world, but it's fictional and it's cute and beautiful, etc. But it's dealing with topics of climate change, etc., without being preachy about it. It's just taking it as a fact. And on the other hand, the film stuff is really bare bones. It's the direction I'm taking is almost no CGI. It's just human flesh decay. It's a lot of bathroom scenes and stuff like that. There's a friend of mine, and this connects to the question of financing. Andrei Tarkovsky, a friend of mine and she's a great artist, Irena Hajduk, and that's also an interesting. She exhibited a documenta, and her art is a company she bought. That's the art piece, like an alternative economic model. So that's also fascinating, because she bought a failed Yugoslav communist publicly owned company, and now it's kind of co-owned with the workers and her. But I mentioned that because I discussed with her Andrei Tarkovsky, and I remember that I think he had a fling or something with Natalia Bondarchuk, who acted in Solaris, and they were in Paris after the Cannes premiere. And Natalia mentioned, maybe we should stay in France, emigrate from the Soviet Union. And Tarkovsky, who was a kind of dissident in the Soviet Union, he said, But yes, here in the West, who would finance my boring films? And it's mind-blowing because the films like Andrei Rublev, they were kind of dissident in a way against the grain. But still, with all of the prohibitions, it didn't show in the Soviet Union for several years, etc. He got financing, like The Mirror. That's as experimental, exactly what Max mentioned. The script was very flimsy in standard sense. They figured it out on the set. And it was the hegemony of the Soviet Union, but it wasn't the hegemony of the market. So the paradox is there would be no Andrei Tarkovsky, perhaps, or he would just do the Polaroids and like be, you know, I don't know, Chris Marker type of lo-fi cinema or something. So, because he did a Chris Marker approach with a full film set. It's fascinating. So that's an example. But why I mentioned this discrepancy between virtual and real is we then discussed Denis Villeneuve, who is influenced by Tarkovsky. And I said, I see that influence. But for me, when I watch the latest Blade Runner, I have a feeling of a lot of American middle shots of people talking with backdrops that I know they made physically, but they look like CGI backdrops to me. It doesn't seem as gritty and humid and real like the first Blade Runner. And she said to me, yes, Denis is trying to fight that, but it already entered him, this virtual aesthetic. And then she said a sentence that is kind of, you know, tongue-in-cheek, but she says, Western media unconsciously is preparing us for a time when there's no more Earth. We'll all just live virtually, kind of relegating
metaverse.
That. Yes. And I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So my film stuff will be literally going into shit to kind of excavate the real, while the gaming stuff is very minimalistic and very blatantly virtual, but also refers to the real in some way. So it's a lost battle, of course, but it's fun.
Max, are we going to then live in a virtual green memory of Victorian England?
I cannot predict that, but I've got three things I'm excited by. I was just having a think.
You had a chance to think. This is unfair.
No. Oh, you were thinking as you were speaking.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm sorry, guys.
So three things. I hope I can go back, not just think about the future. So I would say things that I'm very excited by. The first thing is, you know, for the last 10 years, I've been very excited by the essays of Hito Stahl, the artist or documentary maker, I think as she likes to see herself. I'm still very, very excited by her essay In Defense of the Poor Image, which is all about the circulation of imagery and how the circulation of imagery through digital networks constructs new images and ways of seeing, and also says something about the kind of the network itself and its structure and what it favors and what it doesn't. You know, she's also written essays on verticality and how technology has created new scales through which we see the world, such as like kind of Google Earth, you know, and how that kind of completely changes the way we all see our relationship to the Earth, the way we all see our relationship to each other on this planet. And so I think those essays, those two essays are really, really, you know, just for me, kind of, I'm really, really focused on the way that digital networks change our way of understanding the world around us. So I kind of keep on going back to those essays. And I would say, like, a filmmaker for me who kind of really engages with those ideas is a British animator called Alan Walberson, who makes kind of, he's a commercial animator, but he also has an artistic practice, and he makes video essays on the production of computer graphics, and how they and how the kind of evolution of computer graphics and image making techniques have changed the way we appreciate the world around us. And so those are two kind of big reference points for me in my own practice. And then I'd say, like, moving forwards, I'm really excited by virtual environments as spaces for narrative, but also spaces where you actually lose, like the film, I've previously been kind of very in control of the form of the narrative, because as a filmmaker, you have this very, like, linear structure, which you take people through, and that kind of suits my controlling kind of obsessions. But actually, virtual environments offer multiple branches and pathways through a narrative, and also, like, the kind of the basically the kind of situation where a player can decide to venture through a narrative in a way that you hadn't exactly planned. So I think kind of thinking about the conditions of, or the way that people might experience a narrative in multiple ways, I find, like, a really interesting intellectual and also, like, kind of visual challenge. So I'm kind of very excited by those things. Yeah.
One sentence from both of you, as we are running out of time. Yes or no, metaverse?
Yes. I mean, it's inevitable.
Igor?
Maybe.
Perfect. This concludes our discussion today on the subject of new formats, new stories, the intersection of the financing models between the exciting work of Igor Simić and Max Colson. Thank you for joining us today for the wonderful discussion at the B3 Biennale. Please go see both of the works of Igor and Max, and have a great festival. Thank you very much.